The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble corridors of Valdoria Palace, where Prince Alexander walked with measured steps toward the library. At 12 years old, he possessed an unusual awareness of the world around him, noticing details that most adults overlooked. His dark eyes, inherited from his mother, Queen Isabella, seemed to absorb everything, from the way the ancient tapestries moved in the gentle breeze to the subtle expressions on the faces of the palace staff. Captain Marcus Thornfield stood at attention by the library entrance, his weathered hands clasped behind his back in perfect military posture. For 15 years, he had served as the prince's personal guard, watching the boy grow from a toddling child into the thoughtful young man who now approached him. Marcus had seen 3 generations of the royal family, and his loyalty ran deeper than the palace foundations themselves. "Good morning, Captain Thornfield," Alexander said softly, his voice carrying the polite warmth that had become his trademark among the staff. "Your Highness," Marcus replied with a slight bow, his voice steady despite the exhaustion that had been building behind his eyes for months. Alexander paused at the heavy oak doors, studying the intricate carvings that depicted scenes from Valdoria's history. He had examined these same carvings hundreds of times, but today something felt different. Perhaps it was the way the morning light fell across Captain Thornfield's face, revealing lines of weariness that seemed deeper than usual. "Captain, have you been sleeping well?" the prince asked, turning to face the guard with genuine concern. Marcus straightened slightly, surprised by the question. "I am perfectly fine, Your Highness, ready to serve as always." But Alexander's perceptive nature caught what others might have missed. The slight tremor in Marcus's voice, the way his eyes didn't quite meet the prince's gaze, and the almost imperceptible sag in his usually perfect posture. The boy had inherited his mother's gift for reading people, and something told him that his faithful guardian was carrying a burden heavier than his ceremonial sword. Inside the library, Alexander settled into his favorite reading chair by the tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens. Captain Thornfield took his position near the door, as he had done countless times before. The silence between them was comfortable, built from years of mutual respect and shared routine. As Alexander opened his book, a collection of historical accounts about Valdoria's greatest leaders, he found himself stealing glances at the captain. Marcus stood perfectly still, but there was something in his distant gaze that spoke of inner turmoil. The prince had noticed it for several weeks now, this subtle change in the man who had been a constant presence in his life. The palace buzzed with its usual morning activity. Servants moved quietly through the corridors, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of the royal gardeners tending to the rose bushes drifted through the open windows. Queen Isabella could be heard discussing the day's schedule with her secretary in the adjacent chamber. Alexander tried to focus on his reading, but his attention kept drifting to Captain Thornfield. The man had been more than just a guard. He had been a mentor, a source of stability, and sometimes even a friend. Marcus had taught him about honor, duty, and the weight of responsibility that came with royal blood. He had also shared stories of his own service, tales of adventure and sacrifice that had shaped Alexander's understanding of loyalty. During a particularly quiet moment, Alexander closed his book and observed the captain more carefully. Marcus's jaw was set in a way that suggested he was fighting some internal battle. His hands, usually relaxed at his sides, were clenched just slightly. Most telling of all, his gaze kept drifting toward the windows that faced the palace's east wing, the section that housed the servants' quarters, and, Alexander suddenly remembered, the small cottage where Marcus lived alone. The prince had heard whispers among the staff recently, fragments of conversations that stopped when he appeared. Something about Captain Thornfield's family, about a letter that had arrived from a distant province, about difficult decisions that needed to be made. Alexander had not paid much attention to palace gossip before, but now these half-heard comments began to form a troubling picture. As the morning progressed, Alexander noticed other small signs of distress in his guardian. The way Marcus's breathing seemed slightly labored, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. The manner in which he shifted his stance more frequently than usual, unable to find comfort in any position. Most concerning of all, the captain's usually sharp awareness seemed dulled, as if his mind were elsewhere entirely. When the palace bells chimed 11 o'clock, signaling the end of the morning study period, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. Instead of immediately leaving for his next appointment with the royal tutor, he remained seated and looked directly at Captain Thornfield. "Captain, I need to ask you something, and I hope you will give me an honest answer." Marcus turned toward the prince, his professional demeanor intact despite his inner struggles. "Of course, Your Highness." "Are you well? And please, I don't mean physically, I mean truly well." The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. For a moment, his carefully maintained composure wavered, and Alexander saw a flash of the pain the man had been hiding. It was the look of someone carrying a burden too heavy to bear alone, yet too proud to ask for help. "Your Highness, Marcus began, then stopped, seemingly unsure how to proceed. Alexander rose from his chair and walked closer to the captain, his young face serious with concern. "Captain Thornfield, you have watched over me for as long as I can remember. You have been patient with my questions, protective of my safety, and generous with your wisdom. If there is something troubling you, perhaps it is time for me to try to help you, as you have always helped me." The unexpected role reversal, a 12-year-old prince offering support to a seasoned soldier, created a moment of profound silence in the library. Marcus looked down at the boy who had grown up under his protection, seeing not just the future king, but a compassionate young man who had learned to care for others despite his privileged position. "There is a matter, Your Highness," Marcus admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "A family situation that requires my attention. But my duty is here with you, and I cannot abandon that responsibility." Alexander nodded thoughtfully, understanding that he was being trusted with something significant. The weight of this confidence settled on his young shoulders, and he felt the first stirrings of an idea that would soon echo throughout the palace walls. That afternoon, Prince Alexander found himself in an unprecedented situation. During his usual walk through the palace gardens, he carried with him not just the weight of his royal education, but the knowledge of Captain Thornfield's hidden struggle. The conversation in the library had opened a door that could not be closed, and Alexander felt compelled to understand more. He made his way to the palace's administrative wing, where Mrs. Helena Grayson, the head housekeeper, maintained detailed records of all palace staff. Mrs. Grayson had served the royal family for over 20 years and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone who worked within the palace walls. "Your Highness," Mrs. Grayson said with surprise as Alexander appeared at her office door. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Mrs. Grayson, I was wondering if you could tell me about Captain Thornfield's family. I believe there might be some circumstances that are causing him difficulty." The elderly woman's expression softened with understanding. She had noticed the captain's recent distraction as well, and she appreciated the prince's genuine concern for the palace staff. "Well, Your Highness, Captain Thornfield has a younger sister, Margaret, who lives in the northern province of Evershire. She has been caring for their elderly mother alone since her husband passed away last winter. Recently, their mother's health has taken a serious turn, and Margaret has been writing to the captain, asking for his help." Alexander listened intently as Mrs. Grayson continued, her voice gentle with sympathy. "Margaret has 3 young children of her own, Your Highness, and the burden of caring for everyone has become overwhelming. She has asked Captain Thornfield to come home, but he feels torn between his duty to his family and his oath to protect you. It's been weighing heavily on his mind for weeks now." The prince thanked Mrs. Krause, Grayson, and left her office with a clearer understanding of the captain's dilemma. As he walked back through the corridors, Alexander's mind worked through the implications of what he had learned. Captain Thornfield was facing an impossible choice between his professional honor and his family obligations. That evening, during dinner with his parents, King Frederick and Queen Isabella, Alexander found himself unusually quiet. The royal family dined in the smaller, more intimate dining room when no guests were present, creating an atmosphere where genuine conversation could flourish. "You seem thoughtful tonight, my son," Queen Isabella observed, setting down her silver fork. "Is something on your mind?" Alexander looked up at his parents, both of whom had always encouraged him to speak honestly about his concerns. King Frederick, despite his busy schedule managing the affairs of the kingdom, always made time to listen to his son's thoughts and questions. "Father, Mother, I need to ask you about something important. If someone who serves our family faithfully finds themselves in a situation where they need to choose between their duty to us and their responsibility to their family, what should guide their decision?" King Frederick and Queen Isabella exchanged a meaningful glance. They recognized the thoughtful tone in their son's voice that indicated he was grappling with something significant. "That's a complex question, Alexander," King Frederick replied. "Can you tell us what has prompted this inquiry?" Alexander chose his words carefully, respecting Captain Thornfield's privacy while still seeking his parents' guidance. "I have become aware that someone close to our family is facing such a dilemma, and I want to understand how we, as royals, should respond when those who serve us have personal crises." Queen Isabella leaned forward slightly, her maternal instincts recognizing that her son was learning an important lesson about leadership and compassion. "True leadership," she said gently, "is not about demanding loyalty at any cost. It's about recognizing that the people who serve us are human beings with their own families, dreams, and responsibilities. When we care for those who care for us, we build something stronger than mere obligation. We build genuine devotion." King Frederick nodded in agreement. "Your mother is wise, Alexander. A king who forces his people to choose between their duty to the crown and their love for their families is a king who will ultimately rule over resentful subjects rather than willing servants." These words resonated deeply with Alexander. As the evening progressed, he found himself formulating a plan that would honor both Captain Thornfield's service and his family's needs. The next morning, Alexander woke earlier than usual and made his way to the palace's correspondence chamber. With careful deliberation, he composed a letter that would change the course of several lives. The letter was addressed to Margaret Thornfield in Evershire, but its contents were far from ordinary. In elegant script, Alexander wrote about his family's gratitude for Captain Thornfield's years of faithful service. He expressed the royal family's understanding of the difficult circumstances Margaret faced and their desire to help. Most importantly, he outlined a proposal that would allow Captain Thornfield to fulfill his family obligations without sacrificing his honor or his connection to the palace. When the letter was complete, Alexander sealed it with his personal seal, a privilege usually reserved for official royal correspondence. He then requested an immediate audience with his father, carrying the sealed letter and a heart full of nervous determination. King Frederick received his son in the royal study, a room lined with portraits of previous Valdorian monarchs. The gravity of the space seemed fitting for the conversation that was about to unfold. "Father, I have written a letter that I believe could solve a problem and demonstrate the kind of leadership you and Mother have taught me about." Alexander presented the letter and explained Captain Thornfield's situation in detail. He spoke about the captain's years of dedicated service, his current anguish over his family's needs, and the solution he had proposed in his correspondence. King Frederick read the letter carefully, his expression growing more impressed with each paragraph. When he finished, he looked at his son with obvious pride. "Alexander, this letter demonstrates wisdom beyond your years. You have shown that true nobility lies not in commanding others' sacrifice, but in finding ways to honor both duty and compassion." That afternoon, Alexander made his way to the library where Captain Thornfield waited in his usual position. The prince carried with him not just his regular books, but also a special envelope that would soon change everything. "Captain Thornfield," Alexander said as he approached the guard, "I have something for you." Marcus accepted the envelope with curiosity, noting the official royal seal. As he read the contents, his expression transformed from confusion to amazement to overwhelming gratitude. The letter granted Captain Thornfield an extended leave of absence to care for his family with full pay and the promise that his position would be waiting for him when he was ready to return. More than that, it included arrangements for Margaret and her children to receive assistance from the royal family's northern estates, ensuring that the captain's mother would receive proper medical care. But perhaps most touching of all was the final paragraph, written in Alexander's own hand, expressing the prince's personal gratitude for Marcus's guidance and friendship, and his understanding that caring for family was not a betrayal of duty, but an expression of the very values that made Captain Thornfield such an exemplary guardian. As Marcus finished reading, his eyes filled with tears, the first display of emotion Alexander had ever witnessed from the stoic soldier. The quiet gesture of understanding and support echoed far beyond that moment, creating ripples that would soon spread throughout the entire palace. The silence in the library stretched for several minutes as Captain Thornfield processed the extraordinary gesture he had just witnessed. Alexander waited patiently, understanding that he had just offered something that went far beyond mere royal generosity. He had extended genuine human compassion wrapped in royal authority. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Your Highness, I have never experienced such kindness. To know that my family's welfare matters to you, that my years of service have earned not just recognition, but understanding." He paused, struggling to find adequate words. "This changes everything." Alexander watched as his guardian carefully folded the letter, treating it like the precious document it had become. In that moment, the prince understood that he had learned something crucial about leadership that no textbook could have taught him. Over the following days, news of Prince Alexander's gesture began to spread through the palace in the way that meaningful stories always do, quietly, through whispered conversations and knowing looks. Mrs. Grayson, who had helped Alexander understand the situation, found herself moved by the young prince's maturity. She shared the story with Martha, the head cook, who told Thomas, the stable master, who mentioned it to the gardening staff. Each person who learned about Alexander's letter felt something shift in their understanding of the royal family they served. This was not the cold, distant nobility of ancient stories, but a family that recognized the humanity in those around them. Captain Thornfield spent 3 days preparing for his departure to Evershire. During this time, his entire demeanor transformed. The weight that had burdened his shoulders for months seemed to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and gratitude. His step became lighter, his smile more genuine, and his interactions with the palace staff carried a warmth that had been absent for weeks. On his final morning at the palace before departing for the north, Marcus requested a private audience with Prince Alexander. They met in the same library where their fateful conversation had begun, but the atmosphere was entirely different now. "Your Highness," Marcus began, standing at attention one last time, "I want to formally request a temporary leave of absence from my duties as your personal guard." Alexander nodded solemnly, understanding the importance of this official moment. "Captain Thornfield, Your request is granted with the full blessing and support of the royal family. Thank you, Your Highness. But there is something more I need to say. Marcus relaxed his formal posture and looked directly at the prince. In all my years of service, I have protected your body from physical harm. But you, in your wisdom and kindness, have protected something far more valuable: my honor, my family, and my peace of mind. You have shown me what true nobility looks like, and I will carry that lesson with me always. The captain then did something unprecedented in all his years of royal service. He knelt on one knee before the young prince, not in formal ceremony, but in genuine respect for the character Alexander had displayed. When I return, Marcus said, I will serve not just because it is my duty, but because I have witnessed the kind of leader you will become. The kingdom of Valdoria will be blessed to have you as their king. Word of Captain Thornfield's departure and the circumstances surrounding it continued to ripple outward from the palace. In the servants' quarters, the conversation had shifted from mere gossip to something approaching reverence for the young prince, who had shown such exceptional character. Anna, a young kitchen maid who had recently joined the palace staff, found herself telling her family in the village about Prince Alexander's kindness. Her story reached the ears of local merchants, who shared it with travelers, who carried it to distant towns. Soon, throughout the kingdom of Valdoria, people were speaking not just of their future king's intelligence or royal bearing, but of his compassion and wisdom. Queen Isabella noticed the change in palace atmosphere immediately. The staff moved with renewed purpose, their service carrying an extra measure of dedication. When she inquired about this shift, Mrs. Grayson explained what had transpired, emphasizing how Alexander's gesture had affected everyone who worked within the palace walls. That evening, Queen Isabella found her son in his chambers, reading by candlelight. She sat beside him on the window seat that overlooked the gardens. "Alexander, I heard about what you did for Captain Thornfield," she said softly. The prince looked up from his book, his expression modest. "I only did what felt right, Mother. Captain Thornfield has given so much to our family. It seemed wrong to ask him to sacrifice his own family for ours." "Do you understand the impact your gesture has had?" Queen Isabella asked. Alexander considered the question carefully. "I think I'm beginning to. The palace feels different somehow. People seem happier, maybe, more connected to each other." His mother smiled, recognizing the wisdom in her son's observation. "What you've created, Alexander, is trust. Real, deep trust. When people know that their leaders see them as human beings with their own struggles and dreams, they don't just serve, they commit their hearts to the cause." 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Evershire, bearing Captain Thornfield's personal seal. It was addressed to Prince Alexander, and its contents brought joy to everyone who heard them. Marcus's mother was recovering well under the care of the royal physician who had been sent north. His sister Margaret had been able to secure help for her household, allowing her to spend quality time with her children without the crushing worry of managing everything alone. Most importantly, Captain Thornfield wrote about his intention to return to palace service in 2 months, bringing with him a renewed sense of purpose and an unshakable loyalty born not from duty alone, but from genuine gratitude and respect. On the day the letter arrived, Alexander found himself once again in the library, this time with a new guard, a kind but temporary replacement named Sir Edwin. As he read Captain Thornfield's words, Alexander reflected on the events that had unfolded from one moment of paying attention, of choosing compassion over convenience. The quiet gesture that had begun with a simple question about sleep had echoed through the palace walls, transforming relationships, building trust, and establishing a foundation of leadership that would serve Alexander well in the years to come. He had learned that true power lay not in commanding obedience, but in earning devotion through understanding and kindness. In the months that followed, the story of Prince Alexander's gesture became part of palace lore, told and retold as an example of the kind of leadership that transforms not just institutions, but hearts. When Captain Thornfield finally returned, the reunion was marked not by formal ceremony, but by the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept and a trust honored. The kingdom of Valdoria had witnessed the emergence of a future king who understood that the strength of a realm lies not in the fear of its subjects, but in their willing devotion, earned through acts of compassion that echo far beyond their initial moment, creating ripples of positive change that touch countless lives.